All right, welcome to course 6 or month 6 in our Lunch and Learn series. My name is Joshua and I'm a cyber range engineer. Typically these are presented to you, or some of these videos in our series have been presented by John Gardner. We're just tag teaming a bit here, so I'll be working with you on web proxies. Again, our focus audience for these Lunch and Learns are individuals that are new to security or are just beginning and are wanting to learn more about just that, cybersecurity. So we're focusing on web proxies today. Simply, web proxies can be used in web application hacking, and they provide you with many different capabilities. But amongst them are reconnaissance, enumeration, some forms of exploitation, and as well an enumeration of vulnerabilities that exist in web apps. We like to think of web proxies and web hacking as cookies are to milk. So briefly, let's just talk about what we will be reviewing. We'll talk about what web proxies are, what web proxies are available, how to install a web proxy, and then the usage of a web proxy. So this will be split up into the major topic of the web proxy that we're speaking about, the aspects of the web proxy that exist, and then we'll have a second part in this Lunch and Learn where there will be a demonstration, and that demonstration is actually going to work through the usage of a web proxy. So this presentation and this video is to simply provide a general overview, not too complex, not too in-depth, but a real nice bite of the apple for web application proxy. So I have put a diagram on the left, which might be viewed as a little bit of an oversimplification, but simply you have your web browser for browsing web traffic. We've talked in previous lessons about ports and what services run on certain ports. So we're talking web. So this is going to be the application layer. This is dealing with HTTP and HTTPS more specifically. So from your web browser, if you're visiting Google and you have a proxy on, that traffic will go through the web proxy and then to its destination. And you'll have a bit more of an understanding of the functionality of a web proxy, because let's address what the web proxies are. Well, simply, web proxies are used to capture web traffic from a client to a server, so an endpoint to a website, and vice versa. So when the traffic comes back to your web browser, it is going through that proxy again. This is used so that you can analyze requests sent and responses received. So you can intercept, you can inspect, you can enable web crawlers to figure out the different aspects of the website. And then with web proxies, there are several open source tools that are available to you. And there are also some enterprise or fee-based tools that have a software subscription model that you are also able to use. The one big difference in something that is really simple to understand is that if you pay for it, you will typically get more features than if you don't pay for it. So if there's something missing from a one of the web proxy solutions that you need and you want those additional features and capabilities, well, you just gotta pay a bit of money to receive them, because there are costs to maintain. So what web proxies are available? Well, you have OWASP ZAP, and that is a open source proxy. Its code base is available on GitHub. It has great documentation and is supported by the community. There's Burp Suite. Burp Suite is made by a company called Portswigger. Their platform is used by many web application hackers or bug bounty hunters to analyze and assess web apps. Their solution comes in both a community edition and a pro edition. If you watched our video on Kali, we talked about some of the tools that are available there. Burp Suite might have been one of those tools we mentioned. The version of Burp Suite that comes in Kali, though, is the community edition. So there are some differences between the community edition and the pro version. Pro version is an annual subscription, but like I mentioned before, when you pay for the pro version, you get more features. So there's also Charles and Fiddler, and we'll talk a little bit about Wireshark. Wireshark is not typically known as a proxy. I would not classify it as a proxy, but we have included it as an available proxy because if you're analyzing or needing to proxy certain type of web traffic or traffic to a website and it's not using standard ports like 80 and 443 or HTTP and HTTPS, you can still interact with that site by using Wireshark to look at the packet level for what's going on. So how would you install a one of these proxy solutions? Well, the installations do vary. Most installation procedures are documented. So on the previous page, we provided some of the URLs to these proxies. If you go there, it'll provide you with the installation procedures. But most web proxies you can typically install through an application manager like apt or DNF on Fedora-based systems. Some proxies do come as a Java archive, so you might need to have Java installed on your system. Sometimes during the installation procedures, though, it will check for if dependencies are met, and if the dependencies aren't met, it will fulfill them. Some of these web proxies can be launched through a shortcut or an alias, but you as well are able to launch them through the CLI. So that's how you would get it onto your system. In terms of using it, you will have to modify the proxy settings in your browser. The proxy settings for each browser are different. Firefox has a different procedure than Chrome. Chrome has a different procedure than Firefox. And then GNU IceCat is a free software foundation browser that is very similar to Mozilla's Firefox. There are differences. There's some privacy-centric stuff there, but this is just to explain or show you that you can use any of the web proxy software with many different web browsers that are available. It all comes down to how you set it up. Now, furthermore, and it's a bit beyond the scope of this presentation, but I know that many different web application hackers use different types of proxies. Sometimes they'll use OWASP ZAP, and sometimes they'll use Burp to do a comparative baseline. So setting a static proxy configuration, as we have demonstrated here in this screenshot, may not work for you. So you can use and look at the add-on store for Firefox or the extensions store for Chrome, and look into using something called Foxy Proxy, which will allow for you to add multiple proxies and set rules in terms of what site that proxy is used on and so forth. It just provides a way of a more granular way of control for those proxies. But if you're the type of individual that doesn't like to add extensions or add-ons for security reasons or because of trust purposes, we understand you may just use the connection settings in your browser. So this is how you do it in Firefox. Again, the process is going to be different for Chrome, and the process will be different for IceCat. So how would you use or leverage one of the web proxies like OWASP ZAP or Burp Suite? Well, it can be summed up into three things: view, modify, and intercept. So when you're viewing the web traffic, you may find different types of parameters that are being used in the URL. You may find different types of hidden code snippets in the comments. You can use it for spidering or footprinting to find out web server details, the application architecture, maybe certain types of design patterns or frameworks that the application is using. That pivots into application enumeration or scanning. So this would be like a direct reconnaissance measure. So you're manually mapping out the web application. You're looking to see how the application is programmed and what makes it run. And that is all part of what frameworks it's using, what design patterns are in use, what programming languages. Then you move into modification. This is a little bit of probing techniques where you're changing some of those parameters you've identified. You're manipulating the parameters. So, if you've intercepted some web traffic on login and it's passing you some cookies, are you able to manipulate those cookies in a certain way? Or can you change your user profile identification from a standard user to an administrative user? Types of this modification really plays into the vulnerabilities that exist in a web app. So being familiar with web application vulnerabilities, or OWASP's top 10, will come in handy here. There are vulnerabilities outside of OWASP's top 10 that are important and do exist. But OWASP top 10 is really the starting point for those who are new to web application security and learning about the different types of vulnerabilities that exist there. Modification is always also talking about injection techniques, cross-site scripting, SQL injection, introducing vulnerabilities into an application to see if data is not being handled properly or there aren't proper error mechanisms in place. Injection will move beyond more of those small probing techniques into active exploitation, but it's one of the ways you can leverage one of those web application proxies. One of the things you'll see when we do our demonstration with Burp is that you can do payload generation and set payload parameters in certain places to do an attempt to authenticate to an application and see which passwords are valid. And furthermore, right, we talked about traffic interception to and from a website. This interception allows you to inspect that HTTP and HTTPS traffic to see what's going across the wire and how your browser is communicating with the application and what exists. So that is a brief overview of how to use proxies. So now let's talk about OWASP ZAP. So OWASP ZAP, like I mentioned before, is an open source community-based web application, very similar to Burp. It's available to you on OWASP's website and provides a variety of tools. It provides that proxy. It provides a repeater. So a repeater can be used to do the same request or a similar request with differences over and over again. There's those scanners. So like I mentioned, identifying what type of frameworks are being used or what type of programming languages are in place or the application architecture. That's where a scanner can come into place. There's also a directory and a file brute forcer. So this is where maybe looking for a .git repository on a public website would come into play. You can brute force and look for those different types of directories. Maybe you're just trying to enumerate out the application and see, does it have an administrative portal? Does it have a documents portal? What types of structure is there? This is where your directory and file brute force will come into play. And then OWASP ZAP, like Burp Suite, does have a support for add-ons, and those add-ons expand the capability of the proxy. So let's say a researcher has identified a new vulnerability within a web application, or they've developed a new technique for targeting web applications. This is where your add-ons come into play. They just expand the feature set of the proxy. So like I mentioned, OWASP ZAP is very familiar to Burp, so you'll see some parallels here in its capability suite. The spider that is in Burp Suite is application aware. It can actively scan a website, and it can do so passively. So if you're just browsing, right, and browsing is a manual method of mapping out a web application. If you're just manually mapping out and you're just browsing a site, it will passively crawl that web application to identify more about it. Again, this goes back into the web server details and the application architecture, the programming languages and frameworks. Burp Suite also in its paid version or pro version, it does have vulnerability identification. You can get some of vulnerability identification outside of pro. The last I checked, but it's really related to low-hanging fruit. So HTTPS certificates being out of date, robots.txt files being available with unique attributes and things like that. It's not going into the more complex details of, hey, there's SQL injection on this form, or we've identified a parameter that's susceptible to cross-site scripting. One side note, Burp Suite's vulnerability scanner is good, but a lot of vulnerability scanners, and this is just known in the industry, they're prone to false positives and false negatives. So don't just hang your hat on the results of a vulnerability scan. Actually manually verify whether those vulnerabilities exist. So we're not calling out Burp specifically as being prone to false positives and false negatives. We just know that in automated scanning, a lot of the times those things come up, so we wanted to call it out. The Burp Suite repeater works very similar to the repeater in the OWASP ZAP proxy. It's just repeating the same request with different attributes or different characteristics over and over again to see and gather a response baseline. Burp Suite also has extensions. The cool thing about Burp Suite's extensions is some of those extensions are built by Portswigger employees. There are some that are built by researchers as well. If you ever look into Burp and read some of its documentation, Burp Suite does put out different blog articles about the types of extensions that are being used by researchers and what some people recommend and what's available. And as mentioned before, just to reiterate, there is a pro and a community version. The community version is free, but the free version has limitations on its capabilities and features that pro unlocks. Briefly, I wanted to talk about Charles. Charles is an HTTP proxy. It's lighter weight compared to Burp and OWASP ZAP. It's a reverse proxy that is really focused on developers who need to inspect their HTTP and HTTPS traffic. Again, you should be seeing a common theme in that proxies are used for viewing requests and responses and either tampering with those responses and those requests or making adjustments or changes to them. Furthermore, Charles can be used to view HTTP headers and cookie and cache information amongst web traffic. So next, we'll talk about Fiddler. Fiddler is another lightweight proxy. I don't have much information on Fiddler here because Fiddler, for a long period of its life, was focused on Windows. They then began to beta Fiddler on Linux and Mac OS. However, it's, even though it is out of beta, there are posts on the forum about some of its usability issues. Again, if you want to play around with some different proxies, you know, Fiddler's there, it's available, but typically you'll see out of those mentioned so far, researchers and bug bounty hunters and web application hackers are going to use a ZAP proxy or Burp Suite. That's typically their go-to. And then Wireshark is used not necessarily as a proxy, because Wireshark is not a proxy, it is a protocol analyzer. But if a site is not communicating over HTTP or HTTPS, it's communicating over another protocol, you can use Wireshark to see what type of traffic's being passed and information that's going across the wire at that packet level. So if you're monitoring traffic from your workstation or from your Hackbox to a website, and that traffic cannot be monitored through Burp or OWASP ZAP or the ZAP proxy, as it is also referred to, you can use Wireshark to do that. So Burp Suite and OWASP ZAP are best for sites using those standard protocols of HTTP and HTTPS. But if you're ever doing research or assessing a website that doesn't use HTTP and HTTPS, you can use Wireshark to inspect those packets. So that brings us to the end of this quick presentation on web proxies, with the caveat of our mention of Wireshark, which is a protocol analyzer. We wanted to really just bring everyone up to speed on how they are used, the ones that are available, and the features and capabilities of them. The bulk of learning how to use a web application proxy comes from doing it hands-on. So to pontificate about it and kill you with slides would not be best, and that's why we just provided a brief introductory overview. Here's quickly what you need to know to get up to speed, so now you can go do the hands-on. So we've provided a couple of links here to some resources. PortSwigger has a learning path for web application hacking. So if you begin to use Burp, it's good to go through PortSwigger's learning path. It is available. It teaches you how to use Burp related to web application hacking and web application assessments and research. So that's why we wanted to call that one out. The ZAP proxy, this is the OWASP ZAP proxy that we mentioned earlier. They have a getting started documentation. They also have some videos that can be used to learn more about how to use ZAP and its functions and capabilities. And then you'll see, and as you know, we've called this out in the past, the Tech Data Cyber Range is partnered with Rangeforce. Rangeforce provides a hands-on learning environment related to cybersecurity. Some of the courses that they have available, or modules as they call them, relate to Burp Suite. And so for our demonstration, so that you can see both how Rangeforce works, but also see the hands-on aspect of learning Burp Suite, we'll be using Rangeforce to do that demonstration. So just a call out to Rangeforce there. You can leverage it, or you can see what they have available, and then we'll demonstrate that for you during the demo portion. So that is our course 6 or month 6 of Lunch and Learn, a brief overview and introduction into web proxies or web application proxies that can be used in web application hacking, web application research to help you understand web server details, application architecture, programming languages, frameworks, and design patterns, and just what exists in analyzing the requests sent and responses received for web apps. So thank you for listening, and we look forward to providing you the demonstration and then moving on to course 7 or month 7.